и недвусмысленный сигнал мировому сообществу о нашем твердом намерении исключить космическое пространство из сферы гонки вооружений. Причем любых, а не только ядерных или оружия массового уничтожения. И сохранить его для мирных целей. Это должно стать неукоснительной нормой политики государств и общепризнанным международным обязательством. Другого пути нет. Только гарантированное предотвращение гонки вооружений в космическом пространстве обеспечит возможность мирного освоения космоса и его использования для решения крупных проблем экономического, социального и культурного развития, остро стоящих сегодня перед человечеством, а также для объединения усилий государств в этой области. Именно тогда, а не в отрыве от этой задачи, можно обсуждать ее преломление на отдельные виды оружия массового уничтожения. Для этих целей вместе с делегацией Китая мы предлагаем включить в проект новый оперативный параграф следующего содержания. After operative paragraph 6, insert a new paragraph, which would be number 7. Calls upon all states, and above all, those with major space capabilities, A, to take urgent measures to prevent for all time the placement of weapons in outer space and the threat of use of force in outer space, from space against Earth and from Earth against objects in outer space. B, to seek through negotiations the early elaboration of appropriate, reliably verifiable, legally binding multilateral agreements. Еще раз хочу повторить, Россия и Китай своей поправкой не вычеркивают из проекта призыв не развивать оружие массового уничтожения и не размещать его в космосе, а лишь дополняют его положениями о недопустимости любого вида оружия в космическом пространстве. То есть мы к предлагаемой Соединенными Штатами и Японией крыше добавляем все остальные необходимые элементы дома. Именно этого ждет сейчас от Совета Безопасности подавляющее большинство государств. Призываем всех ответственных участников космической деятельности поддержать наше предложение. На 15 делегаций сегодня возложена особая ответственность не сделать этот шаг, который вместо решения задачи по ГВК приведет лишь к расколу и разобщению. Совет Безопасности ООН должен не подрывать лукавым инициативам наших американских, не подыгрывать лукавым инициативам наших американских и японских коллег, а искать точки соприкосновения и решать реально возникающие, а не гипотетические проблемы. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and pass the floor to China.
主席，外空是全球公益，攸关全人类的安全与福祉。近年来，外空安全威胁和挑战不断增加，外空武器化风险日益上升。防止外空军备竞赛，确保外空用于和平目的，是国际社会面临的一项优先紧迫任务。外空安全问题关乎193个会员国的切身利益，且技术性、专业性强。中方一直主张应在裁军谈判会议、和平利用外空委员会、联大一委等平台进行专门讨论。这符合联合国机构的职权分工，也有利于维护广大会员国平等参与讨论的权利。与此同时，考虑到外空安全问题与维护国际和平与安全的联系，以及一些成员的强烈意愿，中方秉持建设性精神，参与了安理会围绕此问题的讨论与磋商。在此过程中，我们始终主张，既然安理会审议外空安全问题并拟采取行动，就应重视并反映国际社会的普遍关切和呼声，就应尽可能地照顾各方意见，争取协商一致，以为相关平台的专业讨论提供支持与补充。中方认同现有安理会决议草案中与1967年外空条约有关的内容， 但这些内容只是外空安全治理的一个方面，草案还应增加补充其他的一些实质性内容。基于近年联大高票通过的外空决议，中俄对现有决议草案提出了修正案，主张写入呼吁会员国采取措施，防止在外空放置武器。我想强调，这指的是所有类型的武器。尽快谈判订立具有法律约束力的多边协定等内容。我愿指出，该修正案不是新案文，而是获得超过2/3会员国支持的联大决议内容。相信吸收和采纳上述修正案，会让现有决议草案更为完整、全面和平衡。中方呼吁所有成员对修正案投赞成票。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China. Members of the Council have before them a proposed amendment contained in document S/2024/323 submitted by China and the Russian Federation to the text of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/302. Rule 36 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure states, inter alia, the following. When an amendment adds to or deletes from the text of a motion or draft resolution, that amendment shall be voted on first. Accordingly, I intend to put the proposed amendment to the vote first. Will those in favour of the proposed amendment contained in document S/2024/323 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? So, thank you. The result of the voting is as follows. 7 votes in favour, 7 votes against, 1 abstention. The proposed amendment has not been adopted, having failed to obtain the required number of votes. I pass the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan and the United States sought to develop a resolution that could be adopted unanimously. For that reason, we focus on a narrow topic, preventing the placement of weapons of mass destruction in outer space. Over the past weeks, Japan and the United States have made considerable compromises in the name of reaching consensus. And so it was unfortunate that Russia and China put forward an amendment that seeks to divide us. An amendment with language that already 8 Council members did not vote in support of during the last year's first committee. Let me be clear. We are committed to maintaining outer space for peaceful purposes. We have included many paragraphs in our resolution focused on preventing an arms race in outer space, and have emphasized the need for further measures to that end. All of you know our position on China's proposal for a treaty in the Conference on Disarmament. It is not verifiable. It would fail to cover threats like Russia's destruction 2021 test of an anti-satellite missile from the ground. And it is inconsistent with the UN Charter, which permits the use of force for self-defense or where authorized by the Security Council. As our Russian and Chinese colleagues have said, the Security Council should not seek to get ahead of ongoing discussions in the General Assembly or Conference on Disarmament, but rather seek to complement and support them. For this reason, Japan, United States voted no on this amendment. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan. It is my understanding that the Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/302. I shall put the draft resolution to a vote now. Will those in favour of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/302 please raise their hand? Those against or anything. Okay, I don't have it there. Don't worry. Thank you. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows. 13 votes in favour, 1 votes against, 1 abstention. So here it is. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council. I now give the floor to those members who wish to take the floor. I pass the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. I just returned from a trip to Japan where I had the honor of visiting Nagasaki, the last place to ever experience the atomic bomb. It was a reminder of our profound responsibility to prevent the scourge of war and ensure that no place experiences the horror of nuclear weaponry ever again. Unfortunately, today, Russia abandoned that responsibility. Of course, this is not the first time Russia has undermined the global nonproliferation regime. Over the past few years, Russia has irresponsibly invoked dangerous nuclear rhetoric and walked away from several of its arms control obligations. It has remained unwilling to engage in substantive discussions around arms control or risk reduction, and it has defended and even enabled dangerous proliferators. Now Russia has vetoed a straightforward resolution that affirms a legally binding obligation under the Outer Space Treaty that we should not be putting WMD into orbit. And with this abstention from this vote, despite our multiple attempts to forge consensus, China has shown that it would rather defend Russia as its junior partner than safeguard the global nonproliferation regime. Colleagues, President Putin himself has said publicly that Russia has no intention of deploying nuclear weapons in space. And so today's veto begs the question, why? Why, if you are following the rules, would you not support a resolution that reaffirms them? What could you possibly be hiding? It's baffling and it's a shame. This is not the outcome the United States wanted. And given the vote count, it is not the outcome the rest of this council wanted either. But let me be clear, in no way does this vote undermine the obligations Russia or any other state party continues to have under the Outer Space Treaty. And in no way does it mark the end of our shared effort to promote safe, secure, stable, and sustainable exploration and use of outer space. For our part, the United States will continue to model transparency, accountability, and cooperation. We will continue to comply with existing arms control obligations and engage constructively in new ones. And we will continue to show up to this table and to the negotiating table in good faith and pursue bilateral arms control discussions with Russia right now without preconditions. Today's vote marks a real missed opportunity to rebuild much-needed trust in existing arms control obligations. We may be disappointed, but we remain undeterred. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States and pass the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan is disappointed by the failure of the Council to adopt draft resolution S/2024/302. We deeply regret the decision of the Russian Federation to use veto to block the adoption of this historic draft resolution on weapons of mass destruction in outer space. 65 countries co-sponsored today's draft resolution. I repeat, 65. Regrettably, one permanent member decided to silence the critical message we wanted to send to the present and future people of the world. Outer space must remain a domain of peace, free of weapons of mass destruction, including the nuclear weapons. For us and for 65 countries altogether, it is hard to understand why the Council cannot be united on such a simple but significant commitment. Japan, with our co-pen holder, the United States, worked tirelessly to deliver a consensus among the Council members in a constructive and flexible manner. We incorporated comments suggested by the Council members as much as possible, particularly those proposed by the two permanent members. Despite such efforts and 5 weeks of intense consultation, Russia prevents the result we and 63 other United Nations member states wanted to achieve. Adopting this draft resolution would have been a positive and a practical contribution to the promotion of peaceful use and exploration of outer space. If adopted, we could have demonstrated our unity in reaffirming the principle of no placement of any weapons of mass destruction in outer space and in opposing the development of such capabilities. Let me be clear, maintaining the peaceful nature of our outer space is greatly relevant to the work of the Security Council. With a single detonation of a nuclear weapon in outer space, a large number of satellites and other critical infrastructure in outer space would be taken down. The consequences would be catastrophic and would not be limited to outer space. The repercussions would also affect people's lives and sustainable development in every region on Earth. Despite the result today, preventing any nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction in outer space must remain our priority and should be pursued by all UN member states, including those who blocked today's draft resolution. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan and pass the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. First, allow me to extend our appreciation to Japan and to the US for their work on this important resolution. The UK voted against the proposed amendment because this resolution is rightly focused on upholding the Outer Space Treaty, something the whole international community should agree on, and not on what further measures may be needed to prevent an arms race in outer space. And anyway, the amendment offered only one perspective on that debate, a debate that is anyway conducted elsewhere, not in this Council. The UK believes that the best way to prevent an arms race in outer space is to elaborate norms, rules, and principles of responsible space behaviours, which could be composed of an appropriate mix of legally binding and non-legally binding measures. The UK voted in favour of the resolution and co-sponsored it because we believe that the Security Council should send a clear message on the importance of upholding the Outer Space Treaty for international peace and security. the UK is deeply concerned about the erosion of the global international security architecture. The Outer Space Treaty is part of that architecture, in particular its Article 4, which prohibits the placement of nuclear weapons in Earth orbit. It is vital that states' space activities remain in compliance with the Outer Space Treaty and do not nudge competition into conflict, including nuclear conflict, or drive arms races, or further undermine global security norms. It remains the primary responsibility of the nuclear weapon states to avoid actions that increase the risk of nuclear conflict. In that regard, this resolution rightly recalls the joint statement of the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states issued on the 3rd of January 2022 on preventing nuclear war and avoiding arms races. It remains the UK's view that nuclear weapons, for as long as they exist, should serve defensive purposes, deter aggression, and prevent war and coercion. To put it simply, there should be no nuclear weapons stationed in space, and that is something every Council member should agree on. It is therefore profoundly concerning that Russia chose to veto such a resolution, which would have upheld existing international law and sought to prevent an arms race in outer space. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom and pass the floor to Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. We commend Japan and the United States, the lead sponsors of this initiative, and for the hard work, their hard work, to improve the draft text. However, our ultimate concern is whether this initiative will truly and definitely contribute to the shared goal of the Global South of preventing an arms race and weaponization of outer space. Yet, the draft text rightly references key documents like the Space 2030 Agenda and the NPT. We appreciate its emphasis on international law and the role of the Conference on Disarmament in negotiating multilateral agreements. Algeria believes this effort should complement existing initiatives and pave the way for a legally binding treaty on preventing a comprehensive arms race in outer space. While existing forums play a role in promoting the peaceful, we believe that the Russian amendment strengthened the text by advocating for a broader approach that goes beyond just weapons of mass destruction. The threat of an arms race in space and its dire consequences for global peace and security cannot be ignored. That's why Algeria voted in favor of both the amendment and the resolution as a whole. All nations must take responsibility and avoid actions that jeopardize our shared goal of keeping space weapon-free. Transparency, trust building, and cooperation are crucial, especially involving countries with major space capability. Outer space, belonging to all humankind, should be explored and used collaboratively for the benefit of all, regardless of development level. While existing forums play a role in promoting the peaceful use of space, they cannot replace a robust international legal framework. A legally binding treaty on preventing an arms race in outer space is essential. The Conference of Disarmament, the dedicated organ for disarmament negotiations, must begin work on an international instrument for space-related issues without delay. Algeria reiterates its commitment to preventing an arms race in space. We expressed a positive vote on this resolution and on the amendment as a step toward strengthening the legal regime governing outer space activities. We urge all nations to work together to prevent this grave threat to international peace and security and build a peaceful future for all. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria and pass the floor to Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta. El Ecuador votó a favor del proyecto de resolución propuesto por Japón y los Estados Unidos. Además, votó a favor de la enmienda presentada por China y la Federación Rusa. El Ecuador valora y defiende el uso exclusivamente pacífico del espacio ultraterrestre y se opone a su anarquización y aún más a su militarización, lo cual incluye el emplazamiento de cualquier tipo de armamento. En varias ocasiones y foros, el Ecuador ha expresado su clara posición de que no solo debemos abstenernos de militarizar el espacio ultraterrestre, sino también de politizarlo. Por eso, hago un llamado respetuoso a favorecer el diálogo franco y transparente en esta materia, con el objetivo de frenar la posibilidad de una carrera armamentística en el espacio exterior y a fin de evitar que se convierta en otro escenario de confrontación. Reafirmo el pleno convencimiento de mi país de que es urgente avanzar en la negociación de instrumentos jurídicamente vinculantes necesarios para preservar el carácter pacífico del espacio ultraterrestre. Para concluir, saludo nuevamente la iniciativa y esfuerzo de los redactores y lamento que este Consejo no pudo adoptar este proyecto de resolución que contaba con el apoyo mayoritario de sus miembros debido al uso no justificado del veto. Gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador and pass the floor to Switzerland.
Madame la Présidente, garantir une utilisation pacifique, sûre et durable de l'espace extra-atmosphérique contribue à notre sécurité et à la prospérité. C'est un intérêt commun de tous les États. Toute menace dans ce domaine sensible peut avoir des conséquences importantes pour la paix et la sécurité internationale. Préserver l'espace pour permettre aux générations futures de profiter pleinement des opportunités qu'il offre incombe donc non seulement au Comité pour les utilisations pacifiques de l'espace extra-atmosphérique et aux organes désignés par la première session extraordinaire consacrée au désarmement, mais également à ce Conseil. C'est pour ces raisons que la Suisse a voté oui à cette résolution. Nous sommes depuis longtemps confrontés à différentes approches dans le domaine de la sécurité spatiale et la Suisse a toujours insisté sur le fait que celles-ci sont complémentaires. La Suisse reste attachée à sa position relative à l'interdiction du placement d'armes, y compris conventionnelles, dans l'espace et soutient le développement d'un instrument juridiquement contraignant à cet effet. En ce sens, cette résolution est un pas dans la bonne direction. Ma délégation apprécie la transparence et l'inclusivité dont le Japon et les États-Unis ont fait preuve dans le cadre des négociations, ainsi que le fait que nombre de nos considérations aient été prises en compte. La flexibilité dont ils ont fait preuve et les compromis qu'ils ont présentés ont motivé la Suisse à soutenir la proposition telle que présentée par les rédacteurs. Nous regrettons que la résolution n'ait pas pu être adoptée suite à l'utilisation du veto par un membre permanent, car il est pertinent que ce Conseil se saisit de la question de la sécurité spatiale. La résolution contenait des éléments importants au vu du contexte international tendu. La réaffirmation d'obligations existantes, l'affirmation qu'une guerre nucléaire ne peut être gagnée et ne doit jamais être menée, et la proscription du développement de systèmes spécifiquement conçus pour être placés dans l'espace auraient notamment représenté des mesures de confiance importantes. La Suisse souligne que malgré le veto de ce jour, la mise en œuvre des dispositions pertinentes du traité de l'ONU sur l'espace demeure contraignante et nous appelons tous les États qui ne l'ont pas encore fait à adhérer à ce traité. Il est primordial de garantir la stabilité et la sécurité dans l'espace. La Suisse reste disponible pour adresser les défis qui s'y posent dans les cénacles appropriés, y inclut ce Conseil. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland and pass the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Korea voted in favor of the resolution because we believe that the resolution is both timely and necessary. With the advent of a new space era, we have become increasingly dependent on space assets. And any action that hinders peaceful uses of outer space can have far-reaching impact. In particular, a nuclear detonation in space would have a devastating, irreversible impact and can deny everyone's right to safe, secure, and sustainable uses of our outer space. We therefore welcome this resolution, reaffirming our existing obligations under the Outer Space Treaty, and also call on member states that have not yet done so to join this important treaty. At the same time, we understand there is a genuine necessity to further develop rules, norms, and principles in space domain in order to address all space threats. We believe this point is well elaborated in the operative paragraph 3 in a balanced manner, and we don't see the need to include an additional paragraph as China and Russia proposed. We regret that once again a crucial and timely resolution was not adopted due to the veto by a permanent council member. The security landscape is becoming increasingly complex due to the challenges in new domains such as outer space and cyberspace and emerging technologies including artificial intelligence. This resolution could have been a meaningful step for the Council to address these new trends and their implications in the context of the maintenance of international peace and security. The Republic of Korea believes that such effort should continue and stands ready to work with other Council members in this endeavor. I thank you, Madam President.
The representative of the Republic of Korea and pass the floor to Slovenia.
Madam President, we thank the co-sponsors, United States and Japan, for their efforts in leading this process. We deeply regret the use of the veto by the Russian Federation. This is a missed opportunity to reinforce global security by preventing the potential weaponization of outer space. Slovenia engaged in good faith in the negotiations of this resolution with the aim to ensure a safe and secure space environment and peaceful use of outer space. We voted in favor of the resolution because it emphasizes the key role of the United Nations and underscores the importance of international space law, namely the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, as the cornerstone of international legal regime governing outer space activities in the common interest of the humankind. In other words, Madam President, this resolution embodies effective multilateralism in the Earth and in the outer space. The peaceful use and exploration of outer space extend beyond scientific endeavors. They stand for a pinnacle of aspirations and humanity's imagination. More and more our lives depend on the use of space-based technology, whether using satellites for navigation, forecasting weather, monitoring biodiversity, tracking deforestation, managing natural resources, mitigating climate change, or keeping in touch with family and friends online. Considering the benefits it brings, and hopefully will continue to bring to society, it is vital that it remains the province of all humankind and is preserved for peaceful purposes. We particularly stress the importance of peaceful exploration and use of outer space for us today and for the future generations, for the benefit of all humankind. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia and pass the floor to Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President. Guyana voted in favor of the draft resolution presented by the United States and Japan. We thank the penholders for their efforts on this important text and the transparency with which the consultations were conducted. We also supported the amendment proposed by the Russian Federation and China, consistent with our position on General Assembly Resolution 78/238. In our view, both texts sought to promote the peaceful use of outer space and prevent the placement of weapons there, in line with international law, including the Outer Space Treaty and the purposes and principles of the UN as outlined in the Charter. Guyana recognizes that the placement of weapons in outer space could have adverse impacts on the entire planet, and therefore supported the proposals tabled today. We are of the view that the draft resolution that was just vetoed, and with the amendment presented by China and the Russian Federation, could have contributed to averting such a situation. We also believe that the draft proposals could have complemented the ongoing processes within other UN fora. Madam President, Guyana underscores that outer space is the common heritage of humankind and for the benefit of all humanity. This domain should therefore be used strictly for peaceful purposes with no negative consequences. To this end, we reiterate the importance of nuclear weapon states upholding their international obligations and committing to not place nuclear weapons in outer space. As we move forward in our consideration of this topic, Guyana is committed to supporting efforts that guarantee the right of all countries to benefit equitably from the peaceful use of outer space. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana and pass the floor to Sierra Leone.
Madam President, we thank the United States and Japan for the immense work invested in drafting the resolution and the negotiations thereof. Sierra Leone voted in favor of the draft resolution on weapons of mass destruction in outer space, S/2024/302, because we believe in the importance of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Outer Space Treaty in maintaining a peaceful and secure environment in outer space. Sierra Leone recognizes the severe consequences of using WMDs in outer space, which could have detrimental effects on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities and hinder progress towards sustainable development on Earth. We therefore urge all states to prioritize the peaceful exploration and use of outer space for the benefit of all humanity. It is in this vein that Sierra Leone further urges all member states to conduct their outer space activities in compliance with international law and the UN Charter, emphasizing the importance of maintaining international peace and security through cooperation and understanding. We also voted in favor of the amendment S/2024/323 to the draft resolution S/2024/202 because Sierra Leone supports the call for further measures, including political commitments and legally binding instruments to prevent an arms race in and militarization of outer space, and further emphasize the need for effective verification mechanisms. In ensuring that we maintain a practice of consistency, our vote for the amendment S/2024/323 is reflective of our vote in the General Assembly for Resolution A/RES/78/238, components of which formed amendments to the draft WMD Resolution S/2024/302. We close by stating that it's our sincere hope that the members of the Security Council can come together and find a common ground on the issue of non-proliferation of weapons in outer space. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone and pass the floor to the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, к сожалению, Совет Безопасности не смог сегодня принять взвешенное решение в пользу сохранения космоса исключительно для мирного использования. Именно на это была направлена предложена Россией и Китаем поправка, которая не была принята. Крайне показательно, что ни в ходе сегодняшнего заседания, ни ранее авторы проекта резолюции так и не смогли ответить на вопрос, чем конкретно не устраивает их наше предложение. Добавить призыв не размещать в космосе вообще никакие вооружения. Иначе говоря, как мы уже говорили, зачем им крыша, если еще не построены стены? В чем заключается реальная причина, побудившая их внести в Совет Безопасности столь странный проект резолюции, для многих коллег остается загадкой. Ответим на этот вопрос. Постоянный представитель США, зачитывая свою заготовку, фактически саморазоблачилась, прямо подтвердив, что единственная цель, с которой Вашингтон внес этот проект, это очернение России. Если США действительно такие поборники мирного космоса, то почему вы, уважаемые коллеги, проголосовали против нашей поправки о том, что надо запретить размещение в нем любого оружия, а не только оружия массового уничтожения? Ваше молчание на этот счет красноречивее любых слов. И уж точно не США читать другим государствам лекции про опасность применения ядерного оружия. Постоянный представитель США задала на вопрос «почему?». Мы на него ответили. Мы хотим запрета любых вооружений в космосе, а не только оружия массового уничтожения. А вы этого не хотите. Задам вам тот же вопрос. Почему? Моя американская коллега, кстати, поведала о своей поездке в Японию и посещении Нагасаки, и об ужасающих последствиях ядерной бомбардировки. Могу я поинтересоваться, не просветит ли она нас, а кто эту ядерную бомбардировку осуществил? Единственный раз в истории человечества. Или, может, об этом скажет наш японский коллега, страны, которая ни разу на моей памяти не назвала страну, которая ее бомбила, как будто ядерные бомбы, сброшенные на Хиросиму и Нагасаки, действительно прилетели из космоса и взялись ниоткуда. Американский поспред сама только что сказала, что президент Путин неоднократно подтверждал отсутствие у России планов размещать ядерное оружие в космосе. Сказала она, что непринятие этой резолюции не сказывается на уже имеющихся обязательствах России не размещать ядерное оружие в космосе по договору о космосе 1967 года. А может ли посол Томас Гринфилд тогда объяснить, зачем вообще США и Япония внесли этот проект, если он ни на что не влияет? Мы что, теперь можем по каждому высказыванию вашего президента вносить проект резолюции Совета Безопасности? Многое становится понятным, если вспомнить, что Соединенные Штаты и их союзники некоторое время назад анонсировали планы, которые включают размещение оружия, в частности, ударных боевых систем в космическом пространстве, применение силы или угрозы силой в космосе, из космоса, а также в отношении космоса и его использование для проведения боевых операций. Об этом прямо указано в ряде космических стратегий западных государств, которые можно легко найти в открытом доступе. Все предшествующие годы Соединенные Штаты активно сопротивлялись любым инициативам, нацеленным на предотвращение гонки вооружений в космосе. Яркий пример – многолетнее блокирование Соединенными Штатами российско-китайского предложения по поводу проекта договора о предотвращении размещения оружия в космосе, который был подготовлен еще в 2008 году. Россия же, это хорошо известно профильным экспертам, многие годы проводила абсолютно противоположную и конструктивную линию и продвигала на соответствующих площадках в Первом комитете Генеральной Ассамблеи, конференции по разоружению, комиссии ООН по разоружению, Комитете ООН по космосу, инициативы, нацеленные на предотвращение гонки вооружений в космосе. Хочу еще раз заявить для протокола. Мы готовы хоть завтра заключить международную юридически обязывающую договоренность, которая бы содержала всеобъемлющий запрет на размещение в космическом пространстве любых видов вооружений, а не только оружия массового уничтожения, которые и так уже запрещены договором о космосе, а также запрет на применение силы или угрозы силой в космосе, из космоса или в отношении космоса. Но проблема в том, что к этому не готовы наши западные партнеры, которые как раз и занимаются активным военным освоением космоса. И пусть они нас не вводят в заблуждение своими лукавыми речами сегодня, они от милитаризации космоса отказываться не собираются. Предложенный сегодня американской делегацией проект без учета российско-китайского предложения является не более чем пропагандистским политизированным продуктом, который не имеет никакого отношения к сохранению космоса для использования в мирных целях. Через него Вашингтон неуклюже пытается отвести от себя обоснованную критику и переложить с больной головы на здоровую. К тому же это еще и удобный способ для того, чтобы отвлечь внимание от недавнего позорного вето Вашингтона по заявке Палестины стать полноправным членом ООН, что не позволило исправить многолетнюю историческую несправедливость по отношению к палестинскому народу. Важно не упускать из вида и еще один крайне опасный и вредоносный элемент американского проекта. В нем очевидна попытка использовать Совет для введения новых, ранее нигде, включая договор о космосе, не зафиксированных ограничений, что вызывает большие вопросы с правовой точки зрения. Совет Безопасности ООН крайне неподходящий для этого площадка. Дискуссии по проблематике космической безопасности и принимаемые решения должны носить всеобъемлющий характер, включать всех членов ООН и быть сосредоточены на устранении угрозы гонки вооружений в космическом пространстве и возникновения там вооруженных конфликтов. Иначе это не что иное, как очевидная попытка навязать мнение членов Совета Безопасности остальным членам ООН. И это карты в руки тем, кто утверждает, что Совет Безопасности отнимает прерогативу Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН. Россия остается приверженной своим обязательствам в космосе в соответствии с международным правом. Потакать чьим-то агрессивным планам и давать зеленый свет политизированным инициативам с двойным дном мы не будем. Если же западные члены Совета Безопасности, которые только что били себя в грудь и кричали о приверженности мирному космосу, действительно готовы не на словах, а конкретными действиями подтвердить это, мы готовы дать им еще один шанс. Для этого планируем в ближайшее время представить Совет Безопасности альтернативный проект резолюции и начать по нему переговорную работу. Надеемся, что у всех членов Совета здравый смысл и заинтересованность в сохранении космоса в качестве мирной среды возобладают над попытками политизировать столь важную для нормальной жизни на Земле тему. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and pass the floor to China.
主席，67年前，人类发射首颗人造卫星，开始了探索和利用外空的漫漫征程。今天，外空已经成为全球公域，各国在其中利益交融，休戚与共，确保外空用于和平目的，防止外空武器化和军备竞赛，避免外空成为新的战场，已成为国际社会的强烈呼声和普遍共识。数十年来，国际社会为实现上述目标而不懈努力，制定了外空条约等国际法律文书， 在联大通过多份外空安全决议，并在裁军谈判会议、裁军审议委员会、联大一委、和平利用外空委员会、外空安全政府专家组及开放式工作组等平台开展广泛和专业的讨论。在有关讨论进程中，各方普遍认识到，当前外空安全威胁既包括可能在外空放置核武器等大规模杀伤性武器，也包括可能在外空放置其他类型武器，还包括个别国家将外空界定为作战疆域，加快外空军力建设，构建外空军事同盟等。针对上述威胁，只有明确反对外空军备竞赛，推动谈判缔结新的外空军控条约文书，才能切实维护外空持久安全。这是绝大多数成员国，特别是广大发展中国家的普遍呼声。主席，安理会成员在共同推进外空安全治理进程中，应致力于展现善意，增进互信，促进合作，避免相互猜忌、攻讦、指责、制造对抗。提案国应重视并吸纳其他成员国提出的合理建议，争取推动各方就案文达成共识。在明知各方尚存分歧的情况下，急于推动安理会采取行动，只会造成安理会分裂，损害安理会权威，也不利于各方在外空安全问题上的互信与合作。为使决议草案更加完整、全面、平衡，中国同俄罗斯一道对决议草案提出修正案。遗憾的是，修正案未获通过。刚才付诸表决的决议草案不全面、不平衡，没有最大限度反映193个会员国在外空安全问题上的共同利益和共同呼声，因此中方不得不投弃权票。刚才美国代表对中方进行了无端指责，中方对此表示坚决反对。我想强调的是，如果美国和日本真的致力于推动安理会建设性讨论外空安全问题，就应该全面关注外空武器化和军备竞赛风险，就应该旗帜鲜明地主张禁止在外空放置包括核武器在内的所有种类的武器。美国就应该停止研发部署进攻性外空武器。主席，外空不是少数国家的私有财产，而是全人类的共同财富，不是各国角力的竞技场，而是合作共赢的新疆域。国际社会应秉持共同、综合、合作、可持续的安全理念，在平等互利、开放包容的基础上开展外空国际合作，确保各国和平探索利用外空的权利得到充分保障，推动在外空领域践行人类命运共同体理念。同时，应继续坚持防止外空武器化和军备竞赛，尽快启动外空军控国际法律文书谈判，确保外空是一个可造福全体会员国、全人类的和平空间。在此方面，空间技术应用大国应发挥带头和表率作用。我愿重申，中国一贯致力于和平利用外空，并与国际社会开展广泛合作，愿与各国继续携手努力，推动和平利用外空事业， 推进全球经济发展和社会进步，为构建人类命运共同体做出更大贡献。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China. I shall now make a statement in my national capacity. I start by thanking the United States and Japan for this initiative. We appreciate their skillful leadership and their tireless efforts to accommodate the positions of all Council members. Unfortunately, these efforts face yet another veto by a permanent member of this Council. The Council missed a timely opportunity to adopt its first resolution on outer space. As space capabilities continue to increase, it is the duty of this Council to address these threats to international peace and security. This resolution represented an important step in our efforts to maintain international peace and security. With it, the Council could have affirmed its commitment to ensuring that outer space remains a peaceful domain for the benefit of all humankind. We also stressed that the resolution did not prejudice in any way current discussions on the topic in the General Assembly, including in the First Committee, as well as the Conference on Disarmament. In conclusion, Malta reaffirms its principled position against all nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction, not only those deployed in outer space. These weapons threaten our existence and should be eliminated altogether. I thank you. I shall now resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed in the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned. The 9,617th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Israel to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Sigrid Kaag, Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, pursuant to Security Council Resolution 2720 of 2023, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Sigrid Kaag.
Madam President, Excellencies, members of the Security Council, it's been almost 7 months since the 7th of October terror attack perpetrated by Hamas against Israel, a country which continues to be impacted by deep trauma of the attack and the uncertainty of the fate of the hostages. In Gaza, during the same period, over 34,000 people have been killed and tens of thousands have been injured or maimed. Livelihoods, homes, schools, and hospitals have been destroyed. The health infrastructure in Gaza has been decimated. The few hospitals still standing struggle to operate due to severe shortages of supplies and frequent power outages. As summer draws near and temperatures rise, communicable diseases threaten to sweep through Gaza. Children, who in every crisis suffer the worst and the most, are deprived of nutrition, protection, and education, their futures hanging in the balance. The scarcity of food and other essential goods has also led to a breakdown in civil order and the gradual unraveling of the social fabric in Gaza. There is no effective law enforcement. As the Secretary General has said, we have a shared responsibility to secure an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid. Madam President, since my last briefing to this Council on the 7th of March, I've continued to engage in discussions with key governments and stakeholders across the region. I've also submitted and discussed detailed proposals with the governments of Israel, Jordan, Egypt, and Cyprus to accelerate and streamline the delivery of goods into Gaza and to ensure a consistent pipeline of goods for safe distribution across the Gaza Strip. Today, I will share with you my assessment of the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2720, including areas where progress has been made or lack thereof. Allow me to say from the outset that a paradigm shift is needed to continue to meet the immense needs of the civilian population in a secure and safe manner. Madam President, as I've stated to you before, effective humanitarian operations cannot be reduced to counting trucks. This is a false metric for gauging whether humanitarian assistance is sufficient, let alone whether it responds to the basic humanitarian requirements. For example, treating acutely malnourished children or pregnant women is not a matter of eating more calories. They require therapeutic and supplemental foods as well as long-term medical care. Effective humanitarian operations are also about the need for a sustained flow to deliver the right quality and quantity of assistance. This requires a continued focus on volume, predictability, and sustainability of diversified aid to scale up assistance. Humanitarian agencies must be able to move food, medicine, and many other supplies safely and via all possible routes and crossings into and throughout every part of Gaza. UNRWA is pivotal in providing life-saving humanitarian aid and essential social services, particularly in health and education, to Palestine refugees. As such, UNRWA is irreplaceable and indispensable as a humanitarian lifeline and must be allowed to deliver on its mandate. Madam President, on the 5th of April, the Israeli government made several commitments to improve aid delivery in response to requests by the UN and the international community. A number of steps have been taken, including an increase in the volume of aid cleared, inspected and crossed into Gaza, the temporary opening of the Eretz crossing and the opening of Ashdod port for humanitarian goods, an increase in the number of trucks entering Gaza directly from Jordan through Allenby/King Hussein Bridge, and an increased access to the north. Preparations are underway for the other northern crossings. Continued use of Gate 96, an expansion of the opening hours of Kerem Shalom, Abu Salim, and Nitzana crossings, the resumption of operations by some bakeries in northern and central Gaza, and the ongoing repair of the Nahal Oz water line. I've also been advised of the approval of critical communication equipment and an increase in the allocation of fuel. Whilst implementation of some measures is ongoing, further definitive and urgent steps are needed to set the course for a sustained flow of humanitarian and commercial goods into Gaza in terms of volume, need, and reach. Given the scale and scope of destruction and the extent of human suffering, every day counts. The UN is in contact with the Israeli government on other measures that need urgent or continuous implementation. These include issues pertaining to checkpoint procedures, the urgent repair of roads, timely clearances to allow humanitarian convoy movements to take place as scheduled, the approval of additional communication devices, armored vehicles, and spare parts for critical equipment. Agreement on medical and casualty evacuation is equally urgent. Delivery at scale requires a functioning humanitarian notification system and improved and direct communications between humanitarians and military decision makers on the ground. Effective and credible deconfliction is vital for all humanitarian actors in Gaza. And this list of basic measures is not exhaustive. Implementation is urgent, and my office is establishing a monitoring framework to determine progress and impact of respective measures taken, and I will report to you in due course. Madam President, allow me to share an update on the diversification of supply routes under Security Council Resolution 2720. With respect to Jordan, my team has worked with the concerned authorities to launch the Jordan Land Corridor under a new streamlined modality. This has resulted in an increase in the number of trucks, thereby volume, with only one transloading inside the Gaza crossing, and it has the potential for further increases. And the entire UN family is planning for the receipt and onward distribution of cargo at scale directly from Jordan to northern Gaza via the Eretz crossing. This route is both effective and vital to reach civilians in northern Gaza and beyond. With regards to Egypt, given the importance of the aid flow from Egypt, we will continue to streamline operations and maximize access through the Rafah and Kerem Shalom Abu Salim crossings. We've engaged in constructive dialogue to explore opportunities for the optimization of the efficiency of aid delivery through Egypt. And to further streamline access for humanitarian cargo to Gaza from Rafah, the UN has proposed the establishment of an inspection, monitoring and verification unit on the Palestinian side of Rafah. The Egypt land corridor, in particular via the Rafah crossing, is important given its volume for both humanitarian assistance but also early recovery and reconstruction of Gaza in due course. When it comes to Cyprus, the Cyprus Maritime Corridor provides for additionality of humanitarian aid to Gaza. It can never and is not intended to be a substitute for delivery by land. Land routes are the only way to bring in the bulk of supplies needed. Preparations for the building of the floating port and pier on the shores of Gaza are advancing with the involvement of the US and other member states. The UN has outlined the parameters under which it can play a meaningful role in the distribution of aid via this corridor. My office has proposed a multi-donor funding mechanism and provides secretariat support to the maritime corridor to ensure full coordination with the operations on the ground in Gaza. UN monitors have been deployed to Cyprus as part of the 2720 mechanism. Finally, regarding airdrops and in view of the above, several member states have indicated their intent to phase out this mode of delivery in conjunction with the scaling up of assistance via land and sea. Madam President, I'm pleased to announce that the operationalization of the UN 2720 mechanism for Gaza will start in the coming days, and I'm grateful for the constructive cooperation. The mechanism will initially be applicable to the Cyprus and Jordan routes, respectively. Technical consultations will shortly be finalized with Egypt on this route. I've informed the government of Israel on the operationalization of the mechanism as per the resolution. A database and notification system will go online for all cargo destined for Gaza along supply routes. The approval for the placement of international monitors at crossings, inspection, and supply points has been requested from relevant authorities. Verification and monitoring inside Gaza will commence as soon as possible. In the coming weeks, my office will also be operational in Gaza. The operationalization of the mechanism will allow for pipeline prioritization, predictability, visibility, and tracking of supplies to Gaza. As the resolution intended, the mechanism is designed to facilitate and support the work of all humanitarian partners on the ground. Madam President, the extent of the destruction and the devastating impact of this war on the entire population of Gaza calls for an ambitious and comprehensive plan of support with commensurate investment. The recent UN, EU and World Bank interim disaster assessment illustrates the scale of the damage and the magnitude of investments required across all sectors. For example, the rebuilding and repair of the more than 84% of destroyed health facilities, the return of an entire student population to school, whilst educational facilities have been impacted or destroyed. As the Secretary General has stated, the Palestinian Authority has a critical role to play in Gaza. The international community must work towards enabling its return, strengthen its governance capacity, and prepare it to reassume its responsibilities in Gaza. All efforts towards early recovery and reconstruction also need the participation of Palestinian civil society, fostering a conducive environment to re-establish the commercial sector in Gaza and the engagement of the Palestinian business community and its investors are equally important. Madam President, I wish to echo the United Nations' grave concern over the prospect of an Israeli operation in Rafah. Such action would compound an ongoing humanitarian catastrophe, with consequences for people already displaced and enduring severe hardships and suffering. The UN's ability to deliver will also be constrained. In closing, I would like to reiterate the importance of a paradigm shift. This requires a further scale-up in the quality and quantity of assistance and its distribution. Irreversible steps to enable safe, secure, and unhindered delivery inside Gaza, and planning and timely preparations for early recovery and reconstruction. There's no substitute for political will to sustain these efforts. Let us remember that behind every statistic is a human story of loss and suffering, and it's our duty to provide protection, support, and therefore hope for the Palestinian population in Gaza. It's also our duty to advocate for a lasting peace between Israel and a fully independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Clark for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
And thank you very much, Senior Humanitarian Coordinator, for your briefing. As you said, Israel suffered the worst terror attack in its history at the hands of Hamas. More than 200 days on, and Hamas continues to hold hostages. Palestinian civilians in Gaza are facing a devastating and growing humanitarian crisis and the risk of famine. The UK is joining USG COG's important efforts to prevent this situation deteriorating even further. We have trebled our aid commitment in the last financial year, and we're doing everything we can to get more aid in as quickly as possible by land, sea, and air, and to contribute to the paradigm shift that you mentioned. I want to highlight 3 areas. First, we welcome Israel's commitment to increase aid flows into Gaza. For example, the delivery of humanitarian aid through the port of Ashdod and the Erez checkpoint and extending the opening hours of the Kerem Shalom crossing. We now need to see more implementation. There has been some welcome progress in this regard, but much more needs to be done. Our Foreign Secretary reiterated this to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on his visit to Israel last week. Second, as well as getting more aid in, it needs to be the right aid. That is why Resolution 2720 is so important. The UK fully supports Sigrid Kaag's mandate to establish a database and a mechanism to track, verify, and coordinate aid. The UK has provided expert technical support to help delivery of this mandate. And the UK will be providing over $3.5 million of additional funding for equipment to support the UN and aid agencies to get more aid into Gaza. Third, once humanitarian aid arrives in Gaza, it is vital that it can be distributed quickly and effectively. We're calling on Israel to improve deconfliction and to allow UN agencies and humanitarian actors unhindered and safe access into and throughout Gaza, and to enable the UN's minimum operating requirements fully. The tragic deaths of 7 World Central Kitchen workers, including 3 British citizens, demonstrates the need for action. President, the UK recognises that UNRWA is critical to aid delivery in Gaza. We were appalled by the allegations that UNRWA staff were involved in the 7 October attacks against Israel, and we note the ongoing UN Office for Internal Oversight Services investigation into these allegations. We are grateful for the independent review into UNRWA neutrality led by Catherine Colonna, and we will set out our position on future funding to UNRWA following careful consideration of the final report and UNRWA's response. President, the UK remains resolved to working with international partners to urgently secure an immediate pause to get aid in and the hostages out, and then to work for a sustainable permanent ceasefire without a return to fighting and loss of life. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom and pass the floor to Mozambique.
Madam President, Mozambique wishes to thank Malta's presidency for convening this important briefing on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. We also thank Madam Sigrid and the Secretary General, Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, for her updated information and perspectives on the situation in Gaza, particularly in the humanitarian situation over the past 90 days, in light of United Nations Security Council Resolution 2720. We commend her and her entire team for their unwavering dedication to address this man-made crisis in order to alleviate the immense suffering of Palestinians. Madam President, the Israel-Palestinian conflict has long been a source of tension and tragedy in the region. The recent escalation has resulted in significant loss of life. Israel's military operations continue causing more civilian casualties, displacement, destruction of houses, and other civilian infrastructure. The situation remains dire, and urgent action is needed to alleviate the human suffering and address the humanitarian crisis. Despite these challenges, the Council successfully adopted 2 resolutions, Resolution 2712 and Resolution 2720. These resolutions were clear in calling for an immediate and urgent humanitarian ceasefire, cessation of hostilities, and ultimately ceasefire, not only to ensure more and better humanitarian aid to those in need in Gaza, but also to allow for unconditional release of hostages and pave the way for the relaunch of the peace process. The hope was that through the demand, urgent actions, the demand of urgent actions, the suffering could be alleviated and steps towards lasting peace could be taken. Deplorably, 4 months have passed, and yet these resolutions have not been fully implemented. The delay in their implementation is a matter of concern. Madam President, the same purposes that guided this Council to adopt the 2 resolutions in December 2023 must strengthen our collective conscience to enforce international obligations under the international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Mozambique strongly encourages the engagement of relevant parties in implementation of these resolutions. We firmly hold the view that encouraging of relevant parties is crucial for implementing these resolutions. We reiterate our appeal to the Council members with influence on the parties to cooperate with the coordinator and her team to fulfill their mandate without delay and obstruction. The Council must unite and speak with one voice to urgently address the pressing humanitarian situation in Gaza. The situation demands immediate, safe, and unhindered access for humanitarian aid to reach those most in need, bearing in mind that thousands of people and families in Gaza Strip are gathering at Rafah crossing border amidst escalating hostilities. Let me, Madam President, underscore that human toll of this conflict is staggering, with innocent lives caught in the crossfire. The call for a ceasefire remains therefore urgent and crucial. Diplomatic efforts and international pressure must continue. I thank you.
Representative of Mozambique, and pass the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And Senior Coordinator Cog, thank you very much for your briefing. Colleagues, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is beyond dire. Starvation has taken the lives of children in the north. Essential supplies are dwindling. Millions have been displaced. At this perilous moment, President Biden has called on Israel to take a series of specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address this humanitarian crisis, protect civilians from harm, and ensure the safety of all aid workers. Israel must do more to prevent civilian casualties, immediately. And President Biden has made clear that U.S. policy will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate and sustained action on these steps. Israel has taken some positive steps, but not nearly enough and not quickly enough. And so the United States position is clear. Israel must take immediate action to open additional land crossings into northern Gaza. As Gaza faces imminent famine, lives hang in the balance, and every day matters. To complement and not replace additional land crossings and increase aid flowing into Gaza, the United States is working with our partners to implement a maritime corridor. Part of that corridor entails the establishment of a temporary pier in Gaza from which humanitarian assistance will be offloaded. We welcome the UN's commitment to help facilitate the distribution of aid delivered to Gaza via the pier. Another essential portion of the maritime corridor is the full implementation of Israeli commitments to open Ashdod for humanitarian shipments. As we understand it, assistance will be shipped to Ashdod and then transported through land crossings into Gaza. This is critical, and this needs to happen right away. But it doesn't matter how much aid gets into Gaza if that aid can't get into the hands of Palestinians in dire need. The distribution of aid within Gaza is absolutely critical. The plans Senior Coordinator Cog outlined today are vital to achieving distribution of aid at scale, and we look forward to hearing more about the UN's efforts during today's closed briefing. I want to reiterate the Biden administration's full support for Senior Coordinator Sigrid Kaag, and I again call on Israel to cooperate with the UN's efforts to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance at scale. Colleagues, another factor limiting the distribution of aid has been the repeated failure of deconfliction mechanisms. Since October 7, more than 230 humanitarian workers have been killed. This is tragic and unacceptable. Deconfliction mechanisms are vital. This is how we protect the lives of those who are working to save the lives of innocent people. And so, Israel must fully implement functional deconfliction procedures. It must. We reiterate our call for accountability for incidents in which humanitarian personnel were killed. This includes the deadly attack on World Central Kitchen personnel earlier this month. There must be an additional, independent, transparent investigation. Colleagues, as you all know, this week, Foreign Minister Colonna released her report on UNRWA. We appreciate that UNRWA has taken steps to set internal policies and address its neutrality, but more must be done. And UNRWA must undertake substantial reforms to protect its sustainability and mission. We know this will take time and resources, but implementation of the reforms outlined in Colonna's report will be critical, and the United States will work closely with the UN and other partners to ensure UNRWA carries out its duties in a neutral and balanced way for the benefit of the Palestinian people. Colleagues, I fear many have lost sight of the fact that it is Hamas that set this conflict into motion on October 7 when it carried out a heinous attack on Israel, slaughtering concertgoers, burning people alive, committing unspeakable acts of sexual violence. Let's not forget this important fact. The United States has been clear from the beginning that we fully support Israel's right to self-defense, and that support is ironclad. But we have also been clear that as Israel continues to pursue the destruction of the remaining elements of Hamas, we are opposed to a full-scale military operation in Rafah, which would have catastrophic consequences for the civilian population. We reiterate our call for Israel to produce a credible and actionable plan to protect the civilian population in Rafah and address the humanitarian needs of those who have sought refuge in the south. We are deeply concerned by the massive internal displacement within Gaza and the risk of forcible displacement from Gaza. Israel must act in compliance with its obligations under international law, full stop. Colleagues, Since October 7, so much suffering and pain, death and destruction has played out before our eyes on all sides of this conflict. Now more than ever, we need an immediate and sustainable ceasefire as part of a deal to release the hostages by Hamas, which will also allow us to scale up humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians. The United States is working with our partners in the region to make this possible. Hamas, however, continues to reject offers from Israel that would halt fighting and release hostages over and over and over. If Hamas accepted the offer Israel has made, it would allow for an immediate ceasefire that would benefit Palestinians now. Hamas should take this deal. If not, it should explain to the world and to the Palestinian people why they have yet to do so, because right now, Hamas is the sole obstacle to a ceasefire in Gaza. We must all call on Hamas, especially those with the most influence, to take this deal. And we must continue to work together to support the work of Senior Coordinator Sigrid Kaag and all those working to save lives in Gaza at this moment of dire need. Thank you, Madam President.
The representative of the United States, and pass the floor to Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Madam Kaag for her briefing about the implementation of her mandates as stipulated in Resolution 2720. To facilitate humanitarian aid access to the Gaza Strip despite facing multiple challenges and obstacles in her endeavor. Yes, over 200 days of ongoing aggression against Palestinian people in Gaza, and we are still discussing access to basic needs, basic human needs, such as access to food, water, and sanitation, let alone access to education, housing, and health, which has become a luxury for the entire population in Gaza. Madam Kaag's mission of expediting humanitarian aid delivery to Gaza civilian population is crucial. However, more than 4 months after Resolution 2720 adoption, despite Madam Kaag and her team's efforts to establish a UN mechanism for accelerating humanitarian relief in Gaza, this call remains unanswered, and the mandate not fully implemented. The international community, particularly member states with influence on the occupying power, should make every effort to help Madam Kaag fulfilling her mandate and ensuring she succeeds is collective responsibilities, not just one person's duty. Madam President, we firmly believe successful humanitarian aid in Gaza depends on the following. First, obviously, an immediate and lasting ceasefire. Safe humanitarian action throughout Gaza cannot be ensured without a ceasefire. The past 6 months clearly indicated this. as said by Sharon Donnelly, an International Rescue Committee Senior Vice President operating in Gaza. What's increasingly clear is that the deconfliction process is a fiction. It doesn't provide any guarantees of safety. Only a cessation of hostility can help meeting civilian population needs. Otherwise, humanitarian actors will deliver aid at risk of their lives. Second, unhindered humanitarian access. This requires opening all crossing possible and using them at full capacity. According to the occupying authorities, since October 7, only 40% of the minimum required basic needs were allowed into Gaza. After killing, I should say assassinating, humanitarian workers from the World Central Kitchen, the occupying authorities made a lot of publicity on their decision to reopen Erez crossing. However, according to the UN, until last Friday, only 25 trucks were authorized to use Erez crossing. Yes, 25 trucks. The international community, including powerful countries, seems to be incapable of forcing the occupying power to adhere to its obligations under international humanitarian law. Airdrops, a last resort solution, became the only option, but represent only 0.3 of total aid delivered to Gaza. The maritime corridor was undermined before providing tangible result. Our strong belief is that there is no alternative to land routes. All crossing must be reopened now. Third, UNRWA. UNRWA irreplaceable role. This agency has been and continue to be the backbone of humanitarian delivery in Gaza. It should operate freely, without threat. After Madame Colonna's report, there is no more need to further debate UNRWA's credibility and efficiency. The report stated that UNRWA possesses a more developed approach to neutrality than other similar UN agencies or NGOs entities. And, state again, Israel has yet to provide supporting evidence of its allegation against UNRWA's personnel. As Madame Colonna's report indicated, even those agencies rely on UNRWA that retain its central and irreplaceable role of providing a platform and, in many cases, infrastructure for these specialized activities. UNRWA must be empowered again and allowed to operate across Gaza, including the north, as famine risk looms. Fourth, resuming commercial activities. Resuming commercial activities, no matter how large and efficient humanitarian assistance is imperative, but require two main conditions. First, ending the siege imposed by the occupying authorities. Second, launching a vast cash transfer program to help revive Gaza's local market. Starting such an operation is crucial. Fifth, no ground offensive in Rafah. We warn again against any military action in Rafah. Such an offensive should not be allowed under any circumstances. 1.5 million Palestinians are crammed into Rafah, which has become the humanitarian hub of Gaza. The survival of Gaza's entire population depends on situation on this city. A ground offensive would leave people with no choice but to flee to Egypt. It will not be only a humanitarian catastrophe, but an irreversible breach of peace and security, not just in the region, but beyond. Madam President, Gaza's catastrophic situation is a betrayal for humanity and a test for the international order and our multilateral system. This is not a natural disaster. It is a human-made disaster. And we bear the responsibility. The international community must ensure implementation of ICG orders and Security Council resolutions. Failure is not an option. The occupying power that causes death and desperation wherever it goes cannot continue to dictate the rules. This catastrophe must be ended. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria and pass the floor to Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Agradezco la presencia en este consejo de la coordinadora senior de Asuntos Humanitarios y Reconstrucción de las Naciones Unidas para Gaza, así como el informe que nos acaba de proporcionar. Reitero el apoyo del Ecuador a la gestión de la señora Sigrid Kaag y al equipo de todos y al trabajo de todo su equipo con miras a la creación de un mecanismo que haga más fácil y rápido el acceso de ayuda, tarea urgente e importante. Señora Presidenta, Han transcurrido más de 4 meses desde la adopción de la resolución 2720 en diciembre pasado, cuando el Ecuador ejercía la presidencia de este Consejo. Lamentablemente, muchas de sus disposiciones están lejos de ser cumplidas y el valioso progreso realizado es insuficiente ante la magnitud de la tarea. La población civil de Gaza debe tener acceso a la asistencia que necesita en cantidades suficientes y de forma continua y predecible. Alimentos, agua, saneamiento, electricidad, telecomunicaciones y servicios médicos son esenciales para la supervivencia. Mi país ha llamado reiteradamente a que la ayuda humanitaria sea provista y distribuida sin obstáculos. Lo ha hecho desde el inicio de la guerra en Gaza en octubre pasado. Por esto, el Ecuador valora los esfuerzos realizados para la diversificación de las rutas de ayuda y las líneas de suministro por tierra, aire y mar, y alienta a persistir en este empeño a pesar de los problemas y los desafíos enfrentados. En cuanto a las dificultades operativas para el ingreso de ayuda a Gaza y su distribución en la franja, se debe recordar que la resolución 2720 del Consejo exige que las partes en conflicto cooperen con la coordinadora CAC sin demoras ni obstrucciones. La adopción de medidas inmediatas que garanticen la provisión de servicios básicos y ayuda humanitaria ha sido también dispuesta por la Corte Internacional de Justicia en las medidas provisionales emitidas en enero y en marzo. Las resoluciones del Consejo de Seguridad y las disposiciones de la Corte Internacional de Justicia deben ser respetadas. En cuanto al mecanismo para acelerar la entrega de los envíos de socorro humanitario a Gaza, mi país hace votos para que éste pueda funcionar a pleno rendimiento lo antes posible y contribuya a aliviar las penurias que enfrenta la población civil. Para concluir, señora Presidenta, reitero la condena del Ecuador a los atroces actos terroristas de Hamás iniciado el 7 de octubre y a todo acto de violencia contra civiles, incluida la violencia sexual, e insisto en nuestra demanda de que se libere inmediata e incondicionalmente a todos los rehenes y, entre tanto, se garantice el acceso humanitario para atender sus necesidades médicas, tal como lo exigen las resoluciones de este Consejo. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador and pass the floor to Guyana.
Madam President, I thank you for organizing today's briefing and thank Ms. Sigrid Kaag for the updates provided on her work pursuant to the mandate outlined in Resolution 2720. The pressing need for a ceasefire in Gaza is driven home forcefully once again in what has been laid out to the Council this afternoon. The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip continues to worsen as it remains subjected to Israeli bombardments from air, land, and sea. The death toll stands at a staggering 34,000 plus. The number of those injured has surpassed 77,000. These figures should shock our collective conscience and compel us to bring this war to an immediate and just end after more than 200 days of unimaginable horror. Madam President, the provisions of Resolution 2720 are clear on the obligations of parties to the conflict. They must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. This entails ensuring inter alia the provision of civilians and civilian objects, humanitarian access, and the protection of humanitarian personnel and their freedom of movement. It also entails upholding the obligation to ensure the provision at scale of urgently needed basic humanitarian services and humanitarian assistance. These obligations have not been met, in clear defiance of the legally binding orders issued by the International Court of Justice on 26 January and 28 March 2024. Of particular note is the order of the ICJ that Israel take all necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay, in full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provisions at scale by all concerned of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance, and I quote, including by increasing the capacity and number of land crossing points and maintaining them open for as long as necessary." End of quote. The unavailability of sufficient land crossing remains a major hindrance to humanitarian efforts in Gaza, compounded by excessive inspection processes. Guyana reminds Israel of its obligations to allow, facilitate, and enable the immediate, safe, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance at scale directly to the civilian population throughout the Gaza Strip. We call on Israel to honor those obligations. We take note of Ms. Kaag's extensive efforts in extremely challenging circumstances, including towards the establishment of the UN mechanism, and reiterate Guyana's continued support for those efforts. Guyana also stresses the importance of guaranteeing the safety of humanitarian personnel for scaling up humanitarian assistance in the Gaza Strip. An unprecedented number of humanitarian workers have been killed in this war, principally because of non-compliance with international humanitarian law. Humanitarian workers have been directly attacked, as seen in the killing of the 7 World Central Kitchen team members. Others have fallen victim to indiscriminate shelling because deconfliction and notification mechanisms are not functioning adequately. Madam President, allow me to draw the Council's attention to 3 important points. First, while it is crucial to scale up humanitarian support and increase access across Gaza, this alone will not save lives. For humanitarian assistance to be delivered effectively and at scale in a sustainable manner, there must be a permanent ceasefire. Second, Palestinians must not be expected to subsist on humanitarian aid for any lengthy period of time. For the preservation of their dignity, conditions must be created for them to build their own livelihoods. Re-establishing the means for trade and for the market to thrive is essential. I stress again that a secure environment is paramount for this to happen. A ceasefire is indispensable. Deciding to increase humanitarian support to Gaza while delaying a decision about a ceasefire is self-defeating. Third, Guyana reiterates the need for accountability. There is perhaps no greater deterrent than accountability. Where accountability is lacking, impunity thrives, emboldening perpetrators to the detriment of all. In the case of Gaza, impunity has brought disproportionate consequences for women and children, who are the vast majority of those being killed and maimed. Madam President, I conclude by observing that the scale of devastation visited upon Gaza has created a multidimensional crisis, which requires multidimensional approach that takes account of immediate and future needs. Guyana is prepared to work with this Council to design and facilitate implementation of that approach. At the heart of that approach must be the creation of a free and independent state of Palestine in accordance with the pre-1967 lines. This is our duty. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, благодарим старшего координатора Сигрид Кааг за доклад и стремление изыскать возможности для наращивания гуманитарных поставок в анклав в соответствии с резолюцией Совета Безопасности 2720. Как известно, мы воздержались при принятии упомянутой резолюции, предусматривающей в том числе создание механизма ООН для содействия доставки гуманитарных грузов в Газу, о параметрах работы которого сегодня идет речь. Причина отсутствия в этом документе прямого требования о прекращении огня, что является ключевым условием для обеспечения беспрепятственного и безопасного доступа к нуждающимся. Вместо этого в нем фигурирует некое создание условий для прекращения насилия в Газе. Мы предупреждали, что такие двусмысленные формулировки будут трактоваться Израилем как зеленый свет. Именно так это и произошло. Коллеги, мы уже устали повторять. В условиях продолжающейся уже более полугода военной операции Израиля при всесторонней поддержке США в секторе Газа адекватное оказание помощи населению анклава попросту невозможно. Это же очевидная вещь. Гуманитарщики – безоружные люди. Они беззащитны перед обстрелами. Просто бесчеловечно требовать от них погибать под ударами в условиях, когда Совет никак не может принудить Израиль прекратить боевые действия. Хочу напомнить еще об одном важном моменте. Есть логичный исторически сложившийся алгоритм действий Совета Безопасности в условиях конфликта. Сначала требование Совета к сторонам прекратить огонь. Затем мониторинг его соблюдения военными, подчеркну, военными, то есть профессионально подготовленными к этому сотрудниками-наблюдателями. Затем, если они не допускаются в зону соприкосновения, либо констатируют нарушение режима прекращения огня, встает вопрос о мерах принуждения к этому. В частности, о ведении миротворческого контингента. В случае же с Газой вся эта цепочка действий поставлена с ног на голову. И гуманитарщикам, по сути, предложено, жертвуя жизнями, выполнять задачи миротворцев. Коллеги, это же абсурд, к тому же крайне опасно. Если режим прекращения огня не соблюдается, давайте обсудим конкретные меры, как обеспечить его выполнение. У Совета Безопасности на этот счет есть отработанные алгоритмы и инструментарий, в том числе в контексте ведения миротворческих контингентов. Для начала можно было бы хотя бы вернуться к идее более активного подключения органа ООН по наблюдению за соблюдением условий перемирия. Его глава Патрик Гаша уже единожды брифинговал Совет и обещал предоставить более подробные сведения о ресурсах, которыми располагает его миссия. Предлагаем снова обсудить этот вопрос. К тому же израильские власти открыто препятствуют доставке товаров первой необходимости мирным газовитянам. На прошлой неделе мы подробно обсудили ситуацию, в которой сейчас находится Бопор. Такое положение дел просто недопустимо. Насколько нам известно, гуманитарное агентство ООН, включая Бопор, поддерживает значительное присутствие на палестинских территориях. Ресурсов у них достаточно, в том числе финансовых. Груженные конвои стоят на переходах на границе с Газой. Весь спектр юридических возможностей для организации поставок гумпомощи без создания дополнительных настроек в виде механизма имеется. В первую очередь я имею в виду международное гуманитарное право, включая Женевские конвенции, и руководящие принципы из резолюции Генеральной Ассамблеи 46-182. В этих условиях не считаем нужным устанавливать какой-либо специальный гуманитарный режим для Газа, тем более, что он, очевидно, не сработает, пока одна из сторон твердо нацелена продолжать боевые действия. В этой связи всем важно признать одну простую вещь. Проблема заключается не в наличии или отсутствии какого-либо механизма доставки гумпомощи, а в отсутствии условий из-за интенсивных боевых действий, исключение из которых Цахал не делает ни для больниц, ни для школ, ни для гуманитарных конвоев. Наше твердое убеждение заключается в том, что гуманитарный доступ должен быть предоставлен в соответствии с нормами МГП, а гуманитарным работникам должен быть гарантирован адекватный уровень безопасности и защиты. В этой связи вновь повторяем, первостепенная задача международного сообщества в лице Совета Безопасности ООН – обеспечить немедленное и устойчивое прекращение огня. Только после этого можно всерьез говорить о решении проблем в области продовольственной безопасности, обеспечения санитарии, предоставления образовательных услуг и других жизненно важных сфер. Мы, конечно, хотели бы верить, что предлагаемый механизм по доставке гумгрузов изменит ситуацию к лучшему, но это нереалистично в условиях ожесточенных боев и проводимых зачисток. Дело уже дошло до того, что израильские поселенцы устраивают рейды на палестинские деревни, совершают убийства и поджоги. В таких условиях гуманитарщики будут продолжать гибнуть, а единое окно, которое предлагается запустить в рамках механизма, едва ли им поможет. К Госпожа председатель, раз уж наша задача сегодня предметно обсудить концептуальную записку по модальностям работы механизма, позвольте задать несколько вопросов ее авторам. Главный из них. Есть ли согласие израильской и палестинской сторон на применение такого механизма? Проговаривались ли с ними детали этой схемы завоза гуманитарных грузов? Если да, то с кем конкретно? Имеются ли гарантии, что израильские власти не будут досматривать грузовики, как они это делают сейчас, и месяцами не давать разрешения на их въезд? Если таких гарантий нет, то какая добавленная стоимость данного механизма? Чем он фактически отличается от нынешних методов работы? Напротив, в таком случае механизм станет еще одним бюрократическим барьером с дополнительными проверками и досмотрами. Еще один принципиальный вопрос. В концептуальной записке речь идет о точках доступа Керем, Шалом и Рафах, которые и так худо-бедно пропускают грузы. Почему не учтены другие наземные морские пункты, в частности 5 контрольно-пропускных переходов на границе с Израилем, временный причал в Газе и порт в Ашдоде? В документе отсутствует раздел, посвященный взаимодействию сотрудников ООН, которые, как ожидается, будут обеспечивать работу механизма с израильской и палестинской сторонами, а также различными агентствами ООН. Говорится лишь о неких ключевых партнерах, соответствующих властях и гуманитарных игроках. Этот момент требует четкого прояснения. Нам бы хотелось также получить больше информации о коммерческих поставках, которые предлагается осуществлять в рамках механизма, который должен выполнять, по идее, сугубо гуманитарные задачи. С учетом того, что такой подход не имеет аналогов прецедента, были признательны за дополнительные пояснения. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
主席，我要感谢联合国人道和重建高级协调员卡格的通报。加沙冲突爆发至今已经有200天了。这200天里，我们目睹了饥饿、饥荒的蔓延，医疗系统的瘫痪，无辜生命的消逝，上百万民众在死亡边缘的绝望与挣扎。没有任何理由可以为延续冲突辩护，也没有任何借口可以为杀戮平民开脱。国际社会必须汇聚一切努力，缓解灾难，拯救生命，平息冲突。我讲3点。第一，我们对加沙人道灾难持续恶化深表关切。安理会第2721号、2720号和2728号3份决议，国际法院2份临时措施命令都明确要求扩大加沙人道准入，但却始终没有得到有效执行。人道物资准入仍然面临种种人为设限。如果这种局面继续下去，必将造成更多平民因饥荒和疾病死亡。我们敦促以色列开放所有陆路过境点，保障人道物资快速、安全、大规模进入加沙，保障人道物资在加沙境内安全有序分发至最需要的人手里。我们期待卡格高级协调员设立的机制可以发挥更大作用，减少和消除人道物资在进入加沙前和进入加沙后遇到的障碍。以色列应为包括卡格高级协调员在内的所有人道机构开展工作提供配合。第二，我们支持联合国近东巴勒斯坦难民救济和工程处继续发挥作用。保障人道机构开展援助是占领方的责任，饥饿不能被武器化，救援不能被政治化。由科隆纳女士领导的独立审查小组已发布报告，指出工程处多年来设有大量健全的机制，确保机构的中立性，确保机构能够及时对违规行为作出反应和追责，并且数量远超联合国其他机构。至此，关于工程处中立性的争论应该告一段落了。我们敦促所有国家尽快恢复对工程处的共资， 不要再利用任何借口对加沙民众实施额外的集体惩罚。以色列对工程处提出严重涉恐指控，但至今没有分享任何证据，我们对此表示关切。中方重申，在没有切实证据的基础上，对工程处恶意攻击，甚至对整个联合国系统进行不实指责的做法不可接受。第三，我们再次呼吁安理会推动加沙立即实现停火。6个多月的残酷现实充分表明，炮火之下的加沙没有开展救援的条件。安理会第2728号决议明确要求加沙停火，具有不容置疑的约束力。所有会员国都有义务执行。我们对以色列近日对加沙的频繁轰炸表示严重关切，敦促以色列立即停止对加沙的全部军事行动，放弃对拉法的进攻计划。对以色列有重要影响的国家应秉持公正立场，为实现停火发挥积极作用。中方也支持安理会为确保决议的落实，采取进一步的行动。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, I want to thank Ms. Sigrid Kaag, Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, for her very comprehensive briefing. My delegation recalls Resolution 2720, which calls for this position and for the establishment of an effective UN mechanism for providing humanitarian aid to the people in the Gaza Strip. The Senior Humanitarian Coordinator's role of facilitating and expediting humanitarian aid in Gaza is especially critical at this juncture, given that 1.1 million people are projected to face catastrophic levels of food insecurity in the region. Regular updates from OCHA on the situation in Gaza confirm that the volume of humanitarian supply entering Gaza since the start of hostilities in October 2023 is far below the approximately 500 trucks per day estimated by UNRWA to be needed to meet the basic essential food, health, and other needs of the people there. Sierra Leone acknowledges the enormity of the task of increasing the quantum of humanitarian aid into Gaza to minimize the impact of the conflict on civilians, especially on women, children, and other vulnerable persons. We commend the continued engagement and consultation by the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator since her appointment with the IDF and other stakeholders in the region on removing the significant humanitarian access constraints to ensure unfettered access via all routes, air, land, and sea into the Gaza Strip. Such a consultative and well-coordinated approach is essential for seamless aid distribution to address the urgent and continuing needs of the people there, especially in the current environment of heavy bombardment and ongoing clashes. Additionally, we anticipate that an established UN mechanism as stipulated in Resolution 2720 will resolve current operational constraints, improve collaboration with humanitarian actors in the region, and increase their delivery capacity throughout the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, in supporting the Office of the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator and ensuring she delivers on a mandate to facilitate, coordinate, monitor, and verify humanitarian relief consignments to Gaza, my delegation will continue to call for, 1, an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, as stipulated in Resolution 2728, to enable full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access to all civilians, an absence of which will only stifle progress. In this vein, we request the Office of the Senior Humanitarian Coordinator to coordinate efforts with UNRWA to ensure that the Palestinians get full access to humanitarian aid. 2, in reminding parties to the conflict of their obligations under international law, will draw their attention to the consequences associated with blatant violations. We urge parties to the conflict to prioritize the survival, security, and dignity of all civilians. we further call for a functioning humanitarian notification system and a stable communication network that will guarantee the protection of United Nations and other humanitarian personnel and enhance the efficient delivery of essential commodities. Sierra Leone reiterates its call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas, and in the interim, demands that access be granted to the ICRC and all other humanitarian workers to visit and support the victims. In closing, Sierra Leone reaffirms its support to the good office of the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator and stresses the need for the requisite resources to be made available for an efficient service delivery. As a Council member, we'll continue to participate and engage in processes that seek to broker peace and improve the lives of the civilians in both Palestine and Israel. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank Senior Coordinator Sigrid Kek for her very useful, informative briefing on the implementation of Resolution 2720. I would like to extend the Republic of Korea's sincere appreciation for Senior Coordinator Kek's tireless effort. Indeed, since her appointment earlier this year, we witnessed some improvements in the humanitarian efforts on the ground, as Senior Coordinator Kek just indicated some progress made. Nonetheless, as the current situation shows no clear sign of ending, the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is also being extended, exacerbating the long-standing suffering of Gazan civilians, especially women and children, as famine deepens. Sadly, this tragic trend has not changed. Despite numerous Security Council meetings, the adoption of Resolution 2728, demanding an immediate ceasefire, and ongoing diplomatic efforts by US, Egypt, and Qatar. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea takes note of Israel's announcement earlier this month to open further access points into Gaza, including the opening of the Ashdod port and the Erez crossing, and to enhance deliveries from Jordan. During this Council's meeting last month, Ms. Kek mentioned these measures as possible ways to enhance life-saving assistance into Gaza. Without the lifting of all barriers to ensure sufficient and sustained humanitarian assistance and scale, the suffering of civilians in Gaza will intensify even further. As a close friend, the Republic of Korea calls on Israel to swiftly implement this commitment, as such measures will not only ease the suffering of Palestinians, but also enhance the credibility of Israel in the international community, and actions speak much louder than words. As the most efficient and swift routes for the delivery of humanitarian aid is through land crossing, we hope that all possible land crossings, including Karni, can soon be opened widely. The use of maritime corridors, being an important supplement for land crossings, should also be enhanced. And in this regard, we really appreciate efforts to expand the use of sea routes by relevant countries, including the US and Cyprus. As this Council has repeatedly stressed, the safety and security of humanitarian workers, whichever their nationalities are, must be guaranteed. Notification and deconfliction mechanism must be fully internalized in the systems and operations of the parties. Lastly, we would like to reiterate our firm positions that an immediate ceasefire is essential to end the humanitarian suffering in Gaza and simultaneously lessen regional tensions. Another major military operations, including the looming ground operation into Rafah, must not be realized. And based on the ceasefire, Senior Coordinator Kek's other major mandate, reconstruction, should begin, considering Gaza's immense need. To resume meaningful negotiations toward the vision of the two-state solutions, a ceasefire and the reconstruction of Gaza are essential. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, Ms. Kag, for her briefing to the Council, and we welcome her update on the implementation of her mandate in line with the Resolution 2720. Colleagues, in Resolution 2720, the Security Council demanded that parties to the conflict allow, facilitate, and enable the immediate, safe, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance at scale directly to the Palestinian civilian population throughout Gaza Strip. People are dying in Gaza due to malnutrition and dehydration. This is not assistance at scale. People are dying in Gaza collecting assistance. This is not safe. People are dying in Gaza as basic humanitarian and medical items are denied due to dual use. This is not unhindered. People are still dying in Gaza as they do not get adequate assistance today. The resolution was adopted in December. This is not immediate. Slovenia is deeply concerned over the continuously deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza, reaching catastrophic levels and imminent famine. We remain profoundly concerned over the threat of a full-scale operation in Rafah, and we join other members on the Council and call on Israel not to carry it out. We call for the removal of all barriers to the delivery of humanitarian assistance, as stipulated in Resolution 2720. This includes opening all available routes and border crossings. We call on Israel to fully implement the announced opening of the Erez crossings and the use of Ashdod port. We stress the importance of facilitating the delivery of humanitarian aid from Jordan and Egypt. Madam Kag, we welcome your efforts to ensure the implementation of Resolution 2720 and to establish the mechanism for facilitation, acceleration, and verification of humanitarian relief for Gaza. We welcome your engagement with a number of partners. We deeply appreciate efforts of countries in establishing a maritime corridor and continuing to give hope through airdrops. However, we underline that land routes remain the safest and the most efficient way of delivering assistance at scale. We are particularly concerned over the safety and security of UN humanitarian personnel working in Gaza. Much more is left to do to ensure full implementation of Resolution 2720. This includes significant improvements in the deconfliction mechanism, the removal of constraints to fuel supply, addressing delays and insecurities at checkpoints, and allowing the entry of appropriate safety equipment for UN and humanitarian workers. While we welcome the recent entry of 15 out of 30 new trucks to enhance delivery, we underline that many trucks have been destroyed in the ongoing conflict. All these barriers inevitably hinder the UN capacities and efforts. Slovenia believes a number of barriers can be lifted with political will only. This includes better border crossing coordination and smoother inspection processes, as well as sufficient number of drivers and trucks being cleared for use. It includes the full use of existing capabilities, such as UNRWA, which remains the backbone of the humanitarian response throughout Gaza. At the end, and very importantly, it includes greater predictability in aid delivery. Slovenia repeats its call for the full implementation of 2712, 2720, and 2728, as well as the ICJ provisional measures of 26 January and 28 March. We call for the full respect of international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. We once again underline the need for accountability. We share the concern expressed by the High Commissioner for Human Rights regarding reported discoveries of mass graves in Al-Shifa and Al-Nasser medical complexes. Mr. President, I have said it behind closed doors, and I repeat it again. The pictures and news coming from Gaza will haunt us. They will haunt us as individuals sitting on the Council and as the Council itself. There is only one way to adequately address the situation, and so we once again call for the immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages, and removal of all barriers to humanitarian aid. This must be followed by a meaningful commitment to a political process. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, et comme mes collègues, je voudrais commencer par remercier la coordonnatrice de l'action humanitaire et de la reconstruction à Gaza, Mme Sigrid Kaag, de son rapport et de son engagement. 4 mois ont passé depuis l'adoption de la résolution 2720, 4 mois durant lesquels vous avez déployé tous les efforts possibles pour coordonner l'acheminement de l'aide à la population civile, alors que nous faisons face et nous continuons à faire face à une catastrophe humanitaire à Gaza. Le secrétaire général l'a dit en début d'année, et je cite, « L'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire ne consiste pas à compter des camions. Il s'agit de veiller à ce que le volume et la qualité d'aide nécessaires parviennent aux personnes dans le besoin, tel que l'exige le droit international humanitaire. À cette fin, nous attendons des parties qu'elles mettent enfin pleinement en œuvre les résolutions contraignantes que ce Conseil a adoptées depuis les actes de terreur du Hamas le 7 octobre, que la Suisse a fermement condamné. Il en va de même de l'ordonnance de la Cour internationale de justice, selon laquelle Israël doit prendre sans délai toutes les mesures nécessaires et effectives, en étroite coopération avec l'ONU, pour assurer sans restriction et à grande échelle la fourniture des services de base et de l'aide humanitaire requis de toute urgence à la population. Ce Conseil doit faire respecter les résolutions qu'il a lui-même adoptées. Les effets attendus immédiatement ont été soulignés maintes fois. La protection effective de la population civile, la mise en place d'un cessez-le-feu, l'accès humanitaire à la population dans le besoin et la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de tous les otages. Nous devons insister de manière tout aussi urgente pour une désescalade régionale. À défaut, chaque jour engendrera de nouvelles victimes civiles. La perspective d'une offensive militaire d'envergure à Rafah est inacceptable, car elle aggraverait encore la situation de la population civile en proie aux déplacements, aux hostilités, aux épidémies et à la famine. Le Conseil de sécurité doit insister pour que les parties mettent en œuvre immédiatement leurs obligations de droit international. L'utilisation de la famine comme méthode de guerre est strictement interdite par le droit international humanitaire et constitue un crime de guerre. Tous les acteurs humanitaires à Gaza, y compris l'UNRWA, doivent pouvoir accéder à la population dans le besoin de manière sûre et sans entrave. Pour ce faire, l'aide humanitaire doit pouvoir être acheminée par tous les points de passage, puis distribuée dans toute la bande de Gaza, en particulier au nord. Les informations selon lesquelles l'aide acheminée à Gaza a atteint hier leur plus haut niveau depuis le 7 octobre sont encourageantes. Cela est toutefois de loin insuffisant et les efforts doivent être intensifiés. Nous rappelons que les entraves arbitraires à l'accès humanitaire sont également interdites par le droit international humanitaire, à l'instar des attaques dirigées contre le personnel, les installations et le matériel humanitaire. Le personnel onusien, humanitaire et médical, ainsi que les infrastructures de l'ONU et d'autres organisations humanitaires doivent être strictement protégés. Il est impératif que ce Conseil s'exprime sur cette problématique au-delà de contextes spécifiques. La Suisse est en contact avec tous les membres du Conseil sur un projet de résolution à cet égard. Enfin, la Suisse appelle à ce que des enquêtes indépendantes soient menées sur toutes les violations du droit international humanitaire commises au Proche-Orient. Les auteurs de toutes ces violations doivent être amenés à rendre des comptes. Monsieur le Président, je le répète, la mise en œuvre immédiate des résolutions de ce Conseil, un cessez-le-feu, l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire à Gaza de manière sûre, rapide et sans entrave, ainsi que la libération des otages doivent être notre priorité. En tant que membres du Conseil de sécurité, nous devons redoubler d'efforts pour y parvenir le plus rapidement possible et pour éviter à tout prix une escalade régionale encore plus grave. C'est une condition sine qua non si l'on veut redonner aux populations la perspective d'un avenir pacifique où elles pourront vivre dans la dignité et la sécurité. La Suisse reste prête à soutenir les efforts qui peuvent faire renaître l'espoir de paix à travers une solution avec 2 États démocratiques, Israël et Palestine, vivant côte à côte, en paix, à l'intérieur de frontières sûres et reconnues, basée sur les frontières de 1967, y compris avec Gaza en tant que partie intégrante d'un État palestinien. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank Senior Coordinator Ms. Sigrid Kaag for her very early update. The current situation in Gaza, which began 200 days ago with the brutal terror attacks by Hamas and other groups, has led to unprecedented destruction and humanitarian catastrophe. Around half of the Gaza's population, approximately 1.1 million people, are at risk in entering the most severe stage of famine. There is an acute shortage of basic necessities, including safe water, food, shelter, and medicine. The gravity of the crisis in Gaza cannot be stressed enough. In light of the extreme challenge, we highly respect Ms. Kaag's tireless efforts to streamline and expedite the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza by proposing a UN mechanism in line with Resolution 2720. We fully support the role of UNOPS in this regard. Japan underscores the urgent need to enhance the flow of humanitarian aid into and throughout Gaza. We call on Israel to reopen land crossings, particularly the Karni crossing, to ensure the steady flow of aid. The land routes and more entry points into Gaza are vital, with no viable alternative. We also support the activation of a maritime corridor to ensure the aid reaches those in need. Japan also echoed and with the support of the voices of more protection of the humanitarian aid workers. Mr. President, UNRWA plays a central role in Gaza's desperately needed humanitarian operations, and there is no substitute for its essential functions. In this regard, we welcome the final report and the recommendations of the independent review group and hope UNRWA will steadily implement these recommendations. Japan has resumed its funding to UNRWA since April 2nd and has already disbursed approximately $35 million since then. Also, our first in-kind contribution to UNRWA since the resumption will be handed over in early May in Egypt. Lastly, the Security Council last month adopted a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. However, this has not been achieved, and the humanitarian crisis remains dire. A ceasefire is a critical component for improving the humanitarian situation in Gaza while laying the ground for future reconstruction efforts. Thus, Japan expresses our strong support for the serious diplomatic efforts to bring about a cessation of hostilities and the release of the hostages being made by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, and we appreciate their tireless efforts. We reiterate our strong appeal to all parties concerned to reach a deal without delay. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie la coordinatrice spéciale pour son exposé. La France appelle à la mise en œuvre complète des résolutions 2712 et 2720. L'exposé de Mme Kaag confirme l'état catastrophique de la situation humanitaire à Gaza. 2 millions de personnes manquent de tout. Le nombre de victimes civiles ne cesse d'augmenter. La famine s'installe. Dans ce contexte, il est indispensable que l'aide corresponde à l'ampleur des besoins. Elle doit pouvoir emprunter tous les points de passage nécessaires. La France a pris note des mesures annoncées par le gouvernement israélien et elle l'appelle à mettre en œuvre ces annonces sans délai et à prendre toutes les mesures nécessaires pour qu'une aide massive parvienne à l'ensemble de la bande de Gaza. Cela implique l'ouverture de tous les points de passage et la délivrance de toutes les autorisations nécessaires. La France salue les efforts des partenaires régionaux, en particulier l'Égypte et la Jordanie, visant à permettre un acheminement plus substantiel de l'aide ainsi que l'ouverture d'un corridor maritime depuis Chypre. La France poursuit sa mobilisation. Elle soutient l'opération Grain from Ukraine, qui permettra au Programme alimentaire mondial de livrer du blé ukrainien à la population civile de Gaza, et elle soutient une livraison additionnelle d'aide alimentaire par le Programme alimentaire mondial au nord de la bande de Gaza. Il est indispensable de lever tous les obstacles opposés à l'accès humanitaire. Israël doit permettre un accès immédiat, sûr et sans entrave, comme demandé par la Cour internationale de justice. Il ne suffit pas de compter le nombre de camions qui entrent à Gaza chaque jour, mais bien de s'assurer que ceux-ci soient chargés des marchandises nécessaires. L'aide doit non seulement parvenir dans la bande de Gaza, mais également pouvoir circuler à l'intérieur de celle-ci et être distribuée de manière sûre. L'entrave à l'acheminement des secours peut constituer un crime relevant de la compétence de la Cour pénale internationale. Il existe encore de nombreuses restrictions quant aux objets et denrées qui peuvent entrer dans Gaza, en particulier pour les infrastructures de santé, mais aussi pour l'eau et l'assainissement et le traitement des déchets. La protection des travailleurs humanitaires doit être garantie en toutes circonstances. Le droit de la guerre et les principes humanitaires de précaution et de proportionnalité dans la conduite des hostilités doivent également être respectés. La France appelle tous les acteurs à garantir l'efficacité des mécanismes de déconfliction. Monsieur le Président, la France exige la pleine mise en œuvre des résolutions de ce Conseil, à commencer par la libération de tous les otages. Il est nécessaire de parvenir à un cessez-le-feu immédiat et durable et garantir la protection des civils. Nous ne sommes pas confrontés à une catastrophe naturelle. Cesser les combats, c'est la meilleure façon de résoudre la crise humanitaire. La France redit sa ferme opposition à une offensive terrestre à Rafah qui entraînerait d'innombrables victimes civiles et un désastre humanitaire. Il est essentiel que le Conseil de sécurité s'engage résolument dans la voie d'une résolution du conflit et pose les bases d'un règlement politique. La solution des deux États est la seule qui puisse assurer aux Israéliens et aux Palestiniens la paix et la sécurité à laquelle ils aspirent. La France est activement mobilisée en ce sens et elle reste convaincue du rôle central que le Conseil de sécurité doit jouer. Le projet de résolution que nous avons soumis aux membres de ce Conseil, qui aborde tous les volets de la crise, s'inscrit dans cette perspective et j'appelle tous les membres de ce Conseil à le soutenir. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Malta. I begin by thanking Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator Ms. Sigrid Kog for her informative briefing. 4 months after the adoption of Resolution 2720, we regret that there has been no meaningful increase in the scale and predictability of the UN's humanitarian response in Gaza. Malta once again demands the immediate implementation of relevant resolutions of this Council regarding the need for an urgent ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and the facilitation of desperately needed humanitarian aid into and throughout Gaza. In the face of such dire humanitarian conditions, Malta is deeply dismayed by the unjustified blockade of aid into and throughout Gaza. Famine has grasped the north of the Strip, and the rest of the population is now the most food insecure in the world. Over 34,700 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. The vast majority of them are women and children. Furthermore, as recalled by the Secretary General, reports continue to emerge on the use of deadly experimental AI targeting systems to devastating effect in Gaza. Last week, the Council also met to discuss the irreplaceable nature of UNRWA. There can be no meaningful aid response in Gaza without the agency. We have also taken note of the final report regarding the agency's neutrality, which determined that UNRWA has in place significant mechanisms to ensure compliance and respond to neutrality breaches, and further welcome the agency's commitment to implementing the recommendations put forward in the report. However, this UN agency and all humanitarian aid in Gaza continues to be undermined. In these difficult times, we need to avoid politicizing the work of humanitarian actors and undermining the legitimacy of the United Nations in Gaza. We further reject and condemn the staggering number of humanitarian and UN staff killed by Israel during this conflict to date. Thorough and transparent investigations leading to accountability are critical in all instances. The established humanitarian notification and the confliction system must be respected. Yet, we see the opposite in the destruction of hospitals and bombing of aid convoys. We also echo the call of the Secretary General for a credible and independent investigation into recent reports of mass graves at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis and at the Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. The provisional orders of the International Court of Justice on 26 January and 28 March, including those regarding the delivery of humanitarian aid into and within Gaza, must be complied with. While Malta positively notes the ongoing attempts to move aid via alternative routes to Gaza, mainly by air and sea, land access provides the only suitable aid modality that can immediately and comprehensively arrest the humanitarian crisis. We are encouraged by the promises made by the Israeli government regarding the opening of Ashdod port and their its crossings for humanitarian aid. We reiterate our call for such measures to be retained and strengthened in order to address the devastating situation on the ground. While we recognize the 8 World Food Programme trucks which have entered the port in the last number of days, the volume is insignificant when compared to humanitarian needs, what was called for, and what was promised. Israel must do much more to abide by its legal obligations as a UN member state, a party to this conflict and an occupying power. This includes opening those crossings to allow for the safe passage of aid into and throughout Gaza. The UN must be allowed to scale up their response in Gaza in a meaningful and principled manner. Aid delivery must not form part of political negotiation. In conclusion, we reiterate our support for the work of the UN, Ms. Gag and her team. Malta will continue to underline the need for a massive aid scale-up to address the needs of those who are suffering the ongoing catastrophic conditions within Gaza. I resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, we wish to thank Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator Ms. Kach for her briefing, as well as for important work on the ground. Mr. President, since Ms. Kach's appointment to the role of Senior Humanitarian Coordinator following the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2720, Israel has done its utmost to grant Ms. Kach and her staff the highest levels of support and cooperation. We greatly value the ongoing discourse with her, which is of course vital in order to promote the very important efforts in the humanitarian domain. We will continue to work closely with Ms. Kach and her team. Mr. President, despite immense obstacles on the ground, since October 7th, Israel continues to elevate and step up its support to the humanitarian efforts and has found creative solutions despite extremely complex and challenging circumstances, significantly active Hamas actions to hamper and clash with these initiatives. Despite this, Israel's ongoing efforts have brought about substantial results on the ground, with a dramatic increase in the volumes and quantities of aid over the course of the last several months. With regard to the flow of aid into the Gaza Strip, in recent weeks, a daily number of between 300 to 400 trucks carrying aid and essentials were inspected and granted access by the Israeli authorities. Since October 7th, more than 25,000 trucks carrying almost 500,000 tons of aid have been able to access into the Gaza Strip. Significantly, the number of trucks inspected and approved in recent weeks is meaningfully higher than in previous months and was made possible due to the Israeli authorities' ongoing efforts to increase the activity at the Kerem Shalom and its Sana crossings. Moreover, Israel recently announced the opening of Gate 96 crossing, which is utilized for direct humanitarian access to the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and will soon allocate the opening of another route that will enable more aid to be shipped from Ashdod and other locations. Alongside this, recent days have seen more aid trucks using the route via Jordan. This channel, known as the Jordanian Channel, which was coordinated jointly between Israel and the Kingdom of Jordan, will allow 100 Jordanian military trucks to enter every day, 3 days a week. This will be in addition to the UN's aid trucks
that will use this route 3 days a week too. Last week, we already witnessed a record of 200 trucks using the route from Jordan, and we expect to see even higher numbers in the future. The establishment of vital infrastructure is also underway. Israel wishes to take this opportunity to thank the many countries and organizations involved in the construction and operation of field and floating maritime hospitals, including those currently in the final stages of establishment. Israel stands ready to provide any further support needed in these matters, including the ongoing transfer of patients to third countries and the entry of ambulances to Gaza. As for water supply and access, Israel recently repaired 2 additional vital water pump lines, the Nahal Oz line, which will supply water to the northern Gaza Strip, and the second Bnei Sohela line. In this regard, Israel's recent support to the reactivation of wells in the northern Strip is also important to mention. Earlier this week, 4 tankers of cooking gas and 4 tankers of fuel designated for the operation of essential infrastructure entered the Gaza Strip. We also note that 25 bakeries are currently operational in Gaza, providing over 3 million breads, rolls, and pita daily. In addition, in March and April alone, around 7,000 aid packages were dropped by air into Gaza, with over 1,600 aid packages specifically for the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, these steps and others were all made possible through the commitment of the Israeli authorities to the humanitarian efforts, as well as our coordination and joint work with different partners in the region and beyond. In this regard, Israel wishes to commend the U.S. for its immense efforts on the humanitarian front, led on the ground by Ambassador Satterfield. Mr. President, while Israel has clearly stepped up its efforts, this according to external sources as well, it is essential that the UN steps up its capabilities too. As growing numbers of trucks are inspected and enabled entry from Israel's side, we are concerned that these amounts of aid are not always swiftly distributed in the Gaza Strip. As reported recently, the main problem at the moment is not getting assistance into Gaza, but rather getting it distributed within the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, there have been several occasions lately where large numbers of trucks carrying aid, after being inspected and enabled passage by Israel, stood ready and waiting on the Gaza side of the Kerem Shalom crossing. Without being dealt with by the UN, they stood there for days. On certain days, almost 3 times the amount of aid entering was piled up on the Gaza side. The aid distribution was therefore impacted and delayed. The truckloads on the Gaza side at times reached several hundred, were attended to at a later stage, but this creates a bottleneck obstacle at the crossing. This logistical gap impacts the flow of delivery. The UN must find solutions to this logistical gap and, among other things, extend its hours of activity, increase the number of trucks, as well as initiate more convoys to northern Gaza, especially as looting incidents have in late been reduced in that area. Mr. President, as we sit here in this Council to discuss humanitarian efforts, which are indeed extremely important, we cannot remain silent in light of a most horrific humanitarian case of injustice, the 133 hostages held by Hamas and other terrorist groups since October 7th. While this Council expects Israel to step up efforts and do its share with regard to humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, this Council must step up its own efforts and demand that this horror, which has lasted more than 6 months, finally ends. It is regrettable that this Council cannot bring refuge to these hostages and their families. We are here to remind all that these hostages have not been allowed any basic humanitarian assistance by their monstrous terrorist kidnappers at all. Israel will do whatever it takes to bring them home. This Council must step up to that task too. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I will now give the floor to Ms. Sigrid Koch to respond to comments and questions raised.
Thank you very much. There were, I believe, 3 questions. I'll respond to those. First of all, on the question of consent with regards to the mechanism, as asked by the representative of the Russian Federation, well, the mechanism is mandated by this Council and as such not a voluntary arrangement. It's not an à la carte option, but we've had very close discussions and constructive discussions with the Israeli authorities at all levels regarding the operationalization of the mechanism and details related to the notification system as well as the database. And we intend to operationalize it, as I mentioned, and we count on the cooperation of all to ensure implementation, because it's aiming to facilitate, to expedite, and to obviously underpin the actions on the ground by the humanitarian actors. I've also discussed it in a series of meetings with the then Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Mohammed Shtayyeh. I've also discussed it with Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa and a number of his senior officials. So at the highest levels in both Israel and the Palestinian Authority, I have engaged, as I've done with, of course, other partners, important partners in the region. When it comes to the concept note with the funding proposal that was actually sent to donors and member states on the 15th of March, it referred to crossings already opened, but the concept note itself includes also in the cover letter, and I quote, "The mechanism will also be able to service additional aid delivery routes to Gaza as well as maximize the efficiencies of existing routes. Thus, taken in totality, it will serve as a one-stop shop for facilitation of humanitarian relief consignments to Gaza through all entry points present and additional ones, as for instance I listed also in my remarks on the intent by the Israeli authorities to open more and those that have been opened since 5th of April, with key functions in Gaza. So in keeping with the mechanism, the goods coming from Jordan in the first instance, as well as to Gaza via Eretz and other northern crossings present and prospective, I hope, as well as the maritime route, this will be used. And Security Council, the last question, Security Council Resolution 2720, it's clear it requires the mechanism to be used to verify the humanitarian nature of aid. It's, however, of course, a logical premise that the mechanism, the way it is constructed, could also be used for commercial goods in future, in due course, when it comes also to early recovery and reconstruction, but is constructed with a view to the language of the Council for Humanitarian Assistance. It is, however, upon the parties. Commercial goods as such, I'd like to stress that, are needed, very much so within the Gaza Strip. We need the informal economy and the formal economy to be rebooted and combined with cash assistance and the availability of cash, which is currently absent in the Gaza Strip for a number of reasons. This is critically important to help restore elements of human dignity for the civilians in Gaza. And I thank you very much for your support, political unity and voice, and we will continue with the teams and the wider UN family to do our utmost to deliver on the expectations. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Koch for the clarifications she has provided. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Hi.
Okay, we're going to go straight to questions. You've heard the Skype right now, and let's start with questions. Edith Litter from AT.
Yeah, I know Edie.
We've known each other for many years.
That's right.
Ms. Koch, how would you describe Israel's cooperation with your efforts to speed desperately needed aid into Gaza?
Well, I think there's very constructive cooperation with my mission. The discussions I'm having at the highest level with the members of the War Cabinet, but also at a more practical level. Of course, ultimately, the resolution asks for two elements, and one of them is facilitation, expedition, acceleration of the volume of aid getting into Gaza. The second one is the establishment of a mechanism, which you've heard me explain what this will do, to underpin it, to provide transparency, to provide visibility, but also allow for prioritization and speed of acceleration. On the mechanism, as you know, I've mentioned here that we're about to launch, to apply it to the Jordan route as well as the Cyprus route. This also, of course, requires the full cooperation of the Israeli authorities. I have responded to that. And we've seen since the 5th of April a number of measures adopted by the Israeli government. I have listed them extensively. We're in continuous discussion and negotiation about the other measures that obviously we also need, ranging from effective deconfliction to the importation of repair materials and critical equipment, be it either for hospitals or even as simple as the spare parts for trucks. So this is an ongoing, intensive negotiation. What I'm calling for is a paradigm shift in the diversification of the types of goods, continue to increase the volume because the totality of needs of the civilian population is so significant that a lot more is needed. Equally so, the ability for the UN family, but also the NGOs, international and national NGOs, to distribute effectively. And that, of course, needs a broad range of solutions, from the repair of the roads to actually deconfliction, as I just mentioned, but also the ability to operate safely and securely. It pertains to checkpoints, it pertains to crossings. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. I have first follow up on the issue of mechanism that you talked about. How is this, because it's not clear for me the details, if you could give us a little bit more examples that we better understand what we are talking here about. And then the other question is on the port and the Cyprus corridor. Yes. Are they connected, or like is the corridor from Cyprus has anything to do with the port that the Americans want to establish? Do you need this port really or not? Thank you.
Well, let me take a step back. I've always said from the beginning, and I've repeated it here, the maritime corridor is no substitute for land routes. For me, and for, I think you've heard everybody else say this too, it's about land, land, land. It's quicker, it's cost efficient, it's easier, and that was, of course, the situation before the 7th of October. So we need to continue to focus all efforts on the land routes. That's also why it's been important that from the 5th of April, Ashdod has temporarily been made available, that Erez crossing can be used, and that other crossings, as you've heard the Israeli representative just remark, will also be used. It's all about land. Now, the additionality that the maritime corridor can provide is important. It's welcome, but it's additional and no substitute. How the maritime corridor and the port are connected? Well, you need to leave from Cyprus. The goods will be cleared there. Goods will arrive. Humanitarian goods will be cleared, will be security checked. They'll be shipped. And then there's a pier that's currently pier/port being constructed by the US, where the goods will be received, so to speak, and distributed, will be received and distributed by the international community across the entire Gaza Strip. For the UN, we have determined a number of parameters under which the UN family is able and in a position to receive and distribute the goods. but there are also a number of international NGOs that are considering participating in the distribution of goods that come via the maritime corridor. How does the mechanism fit into this? It's the Security Council that said, let's have a mechanism. So we've built a database in which you inform you're a member state or an organization of goods category X coming. They'll be pre-notified, they'll be cleared, and then they'll be shipped. And it will ease the process, at least as planned, it will ease the process of clearance, security checks, and also, of course, the arrival and the quickly onward distribution within Gaza. That's the plan. We will have monitors and our staff that will verify the type of goods, and I'll be working from Gaza with my team, because the end chain is verification and monitoring within Gaza, but in support of the humanitarian action, also to allow the actors to scale up significantly, because significantly more assistance needs to be provided. And as I mentioned, it's not just about humanitarian assistance. We need a broadening of the types of goods that are allowed in, but we also need the commercial sector to start functioning again. Human dignity is also about choice.
Sorry, just a follow-up. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. A follow-up to what you were talking about, the parameters that the UN's outlined regarding UN involvement in accepting goods that come off the pier. Can you tell us what they are, and is that to do with the Israeli military potentially providing the security for this US pier? And then just more broadly, is there enough aid getting in to avert famine?
Well, I think on your last point, our collective effort, of course, are to avert a famine. What we certainly know is that there is still a significant number of children, those who are vulnerable, on a very high end of the scale of malnutrition. Food insecurity is very, very high. So what we need is not only the volume to go up, but we need predictability and we need sustainability. It needs to be a constant. It needs to be every day. People need to know that it is coming. But the importance of fresh produce, for instance, the importance of therapeutic feeding, the types of nutrients that pregnant women need, all that needs to be broadened and consolidated. When it comes to parameters, well, there are a number of them. Indeed, one of them is also appropriate, truly effective deconfliction, freedom of choice, the way we operate, the ability to distribute all over the Gaza Strip, and of course the appropriate distance, in this case also from the Israeli Defense Forces, amongst others. But the parameters are being discussed, and it's been clear from the outset that we've said we want to maximize and be part of the overall effort, but under certain conditions. And there's been no doubt about what the clarity is that we're seeking, and we're very hopeful that we're getting there. Ultimately, the goal is to reach people on a constant basis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Which UN agencies will be involved in the distribution from the U.S. pier into Gaza? Will UNRWA be involved?
I beg your pardon?
Will UNRWA be involved?
In my statement, I've explicitly said the entire UN family. Thank you.